The slap echoed through the suddenly silent diner like a gunshot, a sharp, wet, cracking sound that made forks stop halfway to mouths and coffee cups freeze in midair. An old man, a grandfather by the looks of him, stumbled back in the booth, a bright red handprint already blooming on his weathered cheek. Towering over him was a monster dressed in leather and rage, a biker who had just crossed the line he didn't even know existed. Everyone in that diner saw a bully humiliating a defenseless old man, but I saw something else. I saw the look in the old man's eyes as he straightened himself, a look not of fear, but of profound, controlled calm. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the biker had just made the biggest, and possibly the last, mistake of his life, because he had no idea who this old man was, and more importantly, he had no idea who that old man was about to call. His name was Raymond Holloway, but everyone who knew him, everyone from the cops on the beat to the mayor, just called him Ray. He'd celebrated his 68th birthday 3 weeks ago, but he still carried himself with the steady-gated discipline of a man who had spent a lifetime in uniform. Every Tuesday morning for the past 5 years, without fail, he'd claimed the same corner booth at Murphy's Diner on Elm Street, the one with the worn red vinyl, the slight wobble in the table, and the clear, unobstructed view of both the parking lot and the only exit. Old habits, the kind forged in the crucible of 1,000 higher-risk entries, never really died. You learn to own the room, even when the only thing you're holding is a coffee cup. I was there that morning, off-duty sitting at the counter, trying to wash away the ghosts of a rough overnight shift with a cup of Murphy's famously bad coffee. I knew Ray, not well, but I knew him. He was a precinct legend, a founding member of our city's original SWAT team back in the days when tactical policing was just a controversial idea whispered in back rooms. His picture hung on the wall of the training facility, a young, hard-faced captain in primitive body armor, a ghost from our department's violent past. Now, he was a quiet pillar of the community, a man who read his newspaper, knew every waitress by name, and always, left a generous tip. The trouble started, as it often does, with the sound of a roaring engine. Jake Thunder Morrison and his Iron Wolves Motorcycle Club had been a growing cancer on our town for the better part of a year. They weren't your weekend warriors escaping their desk jobs. They were a plague of intimidation and small-time crime, using their leather-clad numbers and loud bikes to claim territory wherever they went. Thunder himself was a mountain of a man, 6'4" of muscle and menace, with arms covered in crude tattoos that told stories of bar fights and prison time. For the last 3 weeks, he'd made Murphy's his new stomping ground, and for 3 weeks, he'd decided Ray's corner booth was his throne. The first week, I'd watched Ray quietly get up and move to another table without a word. The second week, the same thing, a quiet, dignified retreat. But this morning was different. This morning, I saw a look in Ray's eyes as Thunder's shadow fell over his table. It was a look of quiet resolution. He was tired of retreating. "Move it, old man," Thunder snarled, his voice a low growl that vibrated through the diner. "This is my table." Ray looked up from his newspaper, his gaze steady. "Good morning to you, too," he said, his voice calm. "I've been sitting in this same spot every Tuesday for 5 years. The rest of the diner is empty. I'd appreciate it if you could find another table." Thunder's face, a roadmap of broken veins and cheap whiskey, turned a dark shade of crimson. He wasn't used to being told no. "I don't think you heard me, Grandpa," he spat, his voice rising, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. He unleashed a torrent of names, each one a crude hammer blow intended to shatter the old man's dignity, making the waitresses look away in embarrassment. A young mother near the front quickly ushered her small children toward the exit. The owner, a sweet woman named Mrs. Murphy, looked terrified, wringing her hands behind the counter, too afraid to intervene. Ray calmly folded his newspaper, setting it precisely on the table. "I heard you just fine," he said, his voice never rising, "and my answer is no." That's when Thunder's anger exploded into action. The slap was fast, brutal, and loud. It caught Ray across his left cheek with enough force to send his reading glasses skittering across the floor. The sound echoed through the diner like a gunshot, and in its wake, there was a profound, suffocating silence. Ray's cheek burned, a bright, angry red, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the wave of public humiliation that washed over the room. I could feel every eye watching him, waiting to see the old man crumble, to see him finally break. For a moment, his eyes unfocused, and I could only imagine where his mind had gone, back to his training, perhaps, back to the values he'd spent a lifetime upholding, back to the son he had raised in his own image, his boy, Michael, a man I knew well, the current commander of the city's SWAT team, a man who was, in every sense of the word, a warrior. How could he face his son, knowing he'd failed to live up to the very code he had taught him? Slowly, deliberately, Ray reached down and picked up his glasses. He inspected the cheap plastic frames for damage with the focused precision of a bomb technician, then placed them back on his face. His hands were perfectly steady, a stark contrast to the storm of adrenaline that I knew must be coursing through his veins. He looked up at Thunder, and his eyes were calm, measured. The eyes of a man who had stared down death in a dozen different countries. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His silence was a weapon, far more potent than any threat. He simply reached into his pocket, pulled out his cell phone, and made a call. Thunder let out a barking laugh when he saw the phone. He assumed the old man was calling the local cops, and that didn't worry him in the slightest. What he didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that Ray wasn't calling the precinct. He was calling his son. The conversation was brief, almost unnervingly quiet from my seat at the counter. Ray simply said he was at Murphy's and that he needed Michael to come by when he had a moment. He didn't mention the slap. He didn't mention the confrontation. He didn't have to. I knew, just from the sudden tension in Ray's shoulders, that Michael could hear something in his father's voice, a frequency that only a son and a soldier can detect. After the call, Thunder sprawled in the booth, a conquering king, ordering the most expensive steak on the menu and making crude comments to the terrified waitresses. Ray moved to a small table by the window, a tactical position where he could watch the parking lot. He ordered another cup of coffee and waited, his patience a quiet, unnerving force in the tense diner. Thunder's arrogance swelled with each passing minute. He held court, telling his story to anyone who would listen, embellishing the details of how he'd taught some old fool a lesson. He bragged about his club, making veiled threats about what happened to businesses that didn't show the Iron Wolves the proper respect. The remaining patrons ate in a fearful silence. Ray checked his watch. 11 minutes, that's how long it took. It wasn't just Michael's personal truck that pulled into Murphy's parking lot. It was a convoy. The lead vehicle was an unmarked, black SWAT command truck, followed by two fully manned tactical vans. They hadn't come with sirens blaring. They had simply arrived, a sudden, silent, overwhelming presence that filled the entire lot. Michael Holloway stepped out of the lead vehicle. He wasn't in his daily uniform. He was in his full, immaculate Class A dress uniform, the kind reserved for official ceremonies. On his shoulders were the silver oak leaves of a lieutenant colonel, a promotion so recent he hadn't even had the chance to tell his father. On his chest was a rack of ribbons that told the story of a life spent in the crucible of combat. Behind him, 12 operators from his own SWAT team fanned out, forming a silent, disciplined semicircle. They, too, were in their dressed uniforms. They had been in the middle of a formal awards ceremony at headquarters when Michael got the call, and when their commander said, "My father needs me," not a single one of them had hesitated to come along. Thunder looked up from his steak as the diner filled with the imposing figures of a dozen elite SWAT operators. His cocky expression faltered, melting away as he realized he was suddenly and hopelessly outnumbered. These weren't small-town cops. These were warriors, and they moved with the quiet confidence of men who had faced down true evil. Michael approached his father's table first, his eyes immediately locking on the still angry red mark on Ray's cheek. He asked a single, quiet question, his voice dangerously low. "Are you all right, Dad?" Ray just nodded, his gaze flicking toward Thunder's booth. Michael's eyes followed, and his jaw tightened until the muscles stood out like cords of steel. He turned to face Thunder, his bearing that of an officer accustomed to absolute command. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a threat. He simply introduced himself. "I'm Commander Holloway. My father and I would like to have a word with you, outside." The conversation in the parking lot lasted exactly 7 minutes. I watched through the window as Michael spoke, his voice never rising, while 12 of the city's most decorated operators stood in a silent, unwavering line. Thunder emerged from that circle of silent judgment, looking pale and shaken, his bravado completely gone. He walked back into the diner, approached Ray's table with his head bowed, and offered a stammering, pathetic apology. Ray accepted it with a quiet, regal dignity, but he made it clear that Thunder needed to understand something. He explained that he had served his city for 30 years, that he had earned the right to drink his coffee in peace, and that respect wasn't something you demanded with your fists. It was something you earned with your life. Thunder left $100 bill on the table and practically ran from the diner. Michael waited until the sound of his Harley had faded into the distance before joining his father. Ray looked at his son's new rank, and a smile of pure, unadulterated pride lit up his tired face. The other operators remained respectfully distant, a silent guard of honor, while father and son had their moment. Mrs. Murphy, tears in her eyes, refused to let any of them pay. Several other customers came over to shake Ray's hand, thanking him for a service they had never truly understood until today. The incident reminded everyone in that small town that heroism doesn't end when you take off the uniform. It lives on, a quiet, steady flame, in the souls of those who continue to stand for what's right, long after their wars are over.